Hello, Duncan, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to see you, Jeremy.
It's brilliant. Thanks ever so much for being on today. So, the first thing I want to ask you, Duncan, is how did you get where you are today?
You have to go back a few years, I'm afraid, as you may tell by the whiskers. But
Hmm.
around about 1980, I did a master's in Manchester about innovation and science and what makes that work. And my thesis was on the social analysis of risk. And from that, I moved into insurance because it seemed a logical step to make. And I worked for about 18 years in the market in both personal lines and commercial lines in the north of England, south of England, the middle, most places. And my last full-time job in the sector was as head of insurance for Motability, which is Europe's biggest car fleet. It's about 600,000, 650,000 vehicles, and everyone, by definition, has a significant disability. And I suppose what interested me out of that was not cars much, but the interplay between people and insurance. And this particular group of people who all had, in one sense, quite different needs in terms of their disability. They required a number of different changes to make everything work as it should do. But also they were very same as everyone else in many ways. So it was that, and it was interesting working with the insurer to understand that and make that part of the service that was delivered. And I found that very interesting. And this would be about 2001. I then went self-employed as an independent ethics consultant, which I've been ever since. I've been working with a variety of insurers, big, small, long-term and general insurance markets on ethical issues. So I'm not going in there saying, this is what ethics means in your particular situation. I am saying this is how you can think it through. These are the tools that you can use. These are the other ideas which you need to take account of. And I really try, and I don't do it for them. I tend to do it with them. And then I have to say, great, you've got the idea. On you go. You don't need me anymore. But also for people like professional bodies and a number of bigger insurers who want to understand trends and developments from an ethical perspective and from someone who, to be honest, can be a little bit challenging at times because I've got one foot in the market and one foot outside. So I have a lot of engagement with academics who find insurance now very interesting, more interesting than most other business sectors, and with civil society groups who I listen to and I exchange ideas and debate with them about various things. So my work is, fairly varied, but largely with insurers and professional bodies, UK and Europe.
And what's the thing that you find most important in your work? What's the thing that brings you the greatest joy about it?
I think the way in which insurance has such a role in society and the way in which it is rolling ahead with a transformation program around digital, which is quite revolutionary, and how those two things interrelate. So it does cause some very interesting interactions and projections of saying, this makes great sense. But actually, if it carries on for 10 years or 20 years, what are we going to do? Because I was on a panel in 2017 in Brussels at the main EU data privacy conference of the year. And it's actually on at the moment. I'm very annoyed I'm not there now. But anyway. And the title of the panel was, will big data drive insurance onto the superhighway or off a cliff? And if you think most investors would say, the superhighway, we've never invested in insurance on the basis that it's risky enough to go off a cliff. But it was, and no one could say it was one answer was right or wrong. But the mere fact that it was being addressed in a big forum we're going, hey, insurance is not the same as it used to be, which is
Yeah.
both a good thing, because you think some of
Mm.
the ideas are very stuck in the mud and are now getting thrown out, which is great. And others are, be careful what you wish for. I think pricing has been a key part of that realization of what transformations could happen, but also what some of the consequences could be. And I'm not saying that claims and counter fraud aren't, but I think pricing questions were first raised around pricing. And some of them have been answered, not all of them. So, yeah, that's that.
And what would you say is your mission for Insure?
Well, at the moment, my mission would be to look around fairness and how insurance is delivered as both a product and a service. How that measure of fairness is built into the digital decision systems that insurers are using. I'm interested in how social determinants of risk are being used, and whether ideas like behavioral fairness in pricing is as fair as it actually says it is. And I have great doubts about that. I'm also looking at changes by legislators around what is now being called GDPR 2.0 and how those could really quite contain some of the practices that insurance pricing now feel it is fairly straightforward and normal, and actually they may not be anymore. I think that if I was designing a pricing system, flexibility would be its absolutely number one design criteria, because I think there's a number of things happening around what data can be used, about how analytics can be applied. And the EU AI Act is a bellwether for those changes. It's only a part of it. There are other changes happening, say, for example, around biometric data in the UK and social scoring. The whole idea of social scoring is banned in the EU at them now from, I think, 2 days ago when the AI Act became live, became formally accepted. But actually, if you went, someone in pricing, someone does social scoring all the time because they have to score people's risk using data that is often proxies for the actual thing. And so I've spoken to a number of legal scholars in Europe, and where I'm convening a webinar with them about what does this mean for insurance? Because technically, they're not allowed to do it anymore. So that's pretty significant. And you could say, of course, there'll be some sort of way forward agreed, but actually, the Article 5C, I think it is written in stone. It can't be changed. And so it provides an open door, for example, as a consumer group who feels that the insurance sector is not respecting certain fundamental values, to say, you're social scoring. You're not allowed to do that. You've got to stop. And so I think that the whole gamut of developments which are being wrapped up in this phrase GDPR 2.0 are going to be very significant. But insurers shouldn't be surprised by them, because I've been watching some of the developments happen for about 5 to 10 years now. They are going to be a testing time, I believe.
Yeah, I find it very helpful to have someone like you to translate and interpret these regulations for us, because it is moving very fast and all of us want to comply with the rules, and that could be quite difficult, actually.
Yes, I think it'd be quite difficult to adapt to those rules. I think there's different digital strategies which makes those rules easier to accommodate than others. And the danger is that you may use a form of digital strategy which is particularly incompatible with one or two of the main changes happening. And that really does require a sort of, hey, do we have to redesign our whole thing? And there's others who have put that at the center of what they've been doing, because they've listened to, for example, academics who have been saying, this is how we see the future developing around insurance and digital. And therefore, some of them will say, it's fine, we're okay, we're going to steam ahead. The reason they've done that
Yeah.
is because they had foreseen some of these problems which are going to emerge over the next few years for those who have followed a mainly let's get all the data we can and use it to get closer and closer to the customer. Actually, that's not what customers want. So it may be what they have to put up with, but who wants to put up with something for too long if a nicer alternative comes along? But I think the sector has to do a lot of listening and learning over the next few years to take on board the various aspects of this GDPR 2.0. But it's quite possible. But there's going to be some cultural changes needed to make this less of a reactive thing and say, and more of a, this is how the future is developing, and let's therefore run with it, because policymakers aren't agreeing to many insurance exemptions at the moment.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I did quite a lot of work during the GIP rules coming in on fairness for clients. And what is your view of what would be fair pricing?
I think what I don't do with clients is say, this is what fair pricing is. What I say to them is, these are the factors which you need to keep into consideration. So fairness of merit, which is very central to a lot of our work, is fine. But then, as you can see in certain legal developments in the US in the last few months, fairness of access is now being given priority.
Yes, I saw that, yes.
And you need to develop a form of equality of fairness within your pricing that makes those different elements come together, suitable for your type of business and your type of customers. So I think the first step in working out what is fair in pricing is to start listening to the other ways, the other voices and conversations that are happening around what fairness means. And I suppose my role in that situation is to guide people into and through that conversation. And certainly I've been involved in a few with the actuaries, the Institute of Faculty in the UK, who recognise that actually there are a lot of voices out there who have legitimate views on what are the positives and negatives around pricing practices and how they can be adapted. And I think are also willing to work with the sector. Those conversations, those discussions are an actual important part of actually working out what I would call the new landscape around fairness in pricing and insurance. And I've been involved in one or two of those. And the people who have come along have been very happy to be there. We're still very much wanting to see what they need, but are willing to work with the sector and engage with them on this journey. And I think the sector needs to respond to that more fully than just on occasional cases. Fairness needs to take account of people who need to access the market, who have a need for particular types of insurances. And there's also the idea that, and this is something that started me off on this whole thing maybe about 12 years ago, was, just because you individualize a price or you personalize a price does not make it a fair one. In fact, the danger is that it could make it progressively unfair. So I think in terms of fairness, you need to think ahead and say, if what we're doing is it going to help people get value for insurance over time? And I think some of the practices at the moment would struggle with that. And that's certainly been recognized. I think flood re is a very interesting example of how pricing can become a social and political issue for which the market has to listen and react. And I think that flood re is a good test case for some of the more difficult discussions and scenarios that will happen around, say, life and health insurance. And those are just starting to emerge now. So what I try and do is just help people understand that landscape more. I can't tell a firm this is what you should do to be fair, because they need to make that decision, which is not me opting out, but it's more me making sure that their voice and their wishes are the center of what happens, but that's an informed voice and they understand the wider horizon landscape which they're working through.
Yeah, I understand that. There's a tapestry of companies and they do need to make these decisions themselves. That's fair. Do you think some of that is driven by the complexity, the level of complexity we've got in pricing now, and how that then joins up through an organization to the people that can put the appropriate messages to the regulators and the industry bodies?
I think of the complexities entirely of the insurers making. I
That's
remember
fair.
being involved in scheme pricing for a household, house pricing for a household scheme. And we were going to go from one building rate to 5. And this was quite a sort of discussion about why we should it. And going from, I think, 7 car groups to 20, buy a new computer. There was the times when underwriters would say, oh, my pricing's so sophisticated, I don't know how the premiums are calculated. Which just struck me at the time, and it still does, as you don't understand how your business works then. So and there was something in today's or yesterday's news about actually a lot of people don't understand how AI does what it does.
Yeah.
So if you're going to use it in your pricing, do you want to get your main revenue engine based upon something you don't understand how it works? And the fear of missing out means that some will do that, will take that risk. But as an investor, and I think people are starting to pick up on this, that's not necessarily the type of thing I'd expect from insurers. I don't position them in my portfolio in that way. So they're an audience who are going to be knocking on the executive doors saying, please explain what you're doing here.
Yeah.
And if I'm driving along a car, along the motorway, and I know it's a complex beast underneath the metal, but I know how to control it. But if I felt that I didn't, I would probably just want to pull over and either get the book out and understand what's happening, or just think I'll take the train instead and hand over that complexity to someone else. I think that if you don't, you're accountable for the outcomes that your pricing generates. And the problem with SMCR, it takes an awful long time for that individual accountability to be enacted and enforced. They need to pay more attention and get more to grips with how the systems work. And that to me seems an absolutely what managers are there to do.
Yeah, definitely. I really clearly, distinctly remember in about 2008 when Bob Diamond from, I think, Barclays was in front of the select committee, and he was asked to explain how they calculated the rate for their complex financial products, and he couldn't even begin to. He couldn't even begin to explain it, and he also couldn't explain how they then were able to control the business, because they weren't. And that's always stuck with me when I work with complicated models and so on. I do say in my book Price Writer that models divide into 2 types: the ones that you could comfortably explain to a customer how I arrived at your price, and the ones where you can't. So just to finish up, Duncan, what do you see as your vision for the future?
I'd like to see insurance maintain a big important role that it's always had, which is to be there for everyone, priced in a way which people can feel is fair, maybe not themselves understand, but can rely on someone else to say, yeah, this is a fair price. And that there's a lot more transparency within the sector about how it goes about these things, so that various parties around the public can engage with the sector and understand and appreciate the value that's being created. It's happened before. It can happen again. And so we need to get back to those times when it was thought to be, the law courts had for many years a view that in answering the question, what is a fair price in the market, would say it's what the market does.
Yeah.
And actually that's now lost. So they've got to regain some basis on which arbiters such as the law courts can say, yeah, that's a measure which I can understand, and I think this case is in line or not in line with it. We've lost that, and so we need to regain those aspects. And that's what I would like to see happen, whether I'm a bit on the old side, so whether it will happen in my lifetime is a mixture of both my sustainability and the market's evolution.
We shall have to see. Brilliant, Duncan. Well, thank you ever so much for taking the time. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Cool. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
Yeah,
Bye bye.
thanks. Bye.